everyone, this is Anugrah Rao. Welcome to the 56th episode of Microsoft Hour of Code, brought to you by Millionlights. Millionlights is a TV channel dedicated to improving skills of people and their employability. Now, let me tell you more about Microsoft Hour of Code. Microsoft Hour of Code is a series of lectures, courses, and talks by experts who are going to discuss the latest Microsoft technologies, topics related to programming, and industry forecasts that are all focused on employability. This course is basically for people pursuing computer science. This content has been created by our partner Microsoft. And today we have Christopher Harrison and Suzanne with us who will be discussing everything you need to know about creating website with Python, Flask and SQL. Create, configure and connect to SQL databases. Learn to structure your code, check out advanced UI options, find out what Jinja templates can do for you and get started with Bootstrap. Get the skills you need to publish a professional website and level up your Python and Flask knowledge. The topics we will cover in this course are design of a Flask application, designing Python classes, introduction to relational databases, connecting to relational databases, layouts using Jinja, introduction to Bootstrap. So let's get started with design of Flask application, in which we will learn designing Flask applications and get an introduction to the concepts of classes, how to structure code, how to navigate the Flask environment. So let's get started.
All right, well, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be.
Bonjour, guten Tag, guten Abend, buonasera, whatever. Good
and
morning.
Susan is speaking in tongues. This is SQL, Python, and Flask. That is Susan Ibach. I am Christopher Harrison. And what we want to go ahead and do is start off kind of the same way that we always start off. We'll go ahead and introduce ourselves. We'll roll on into the overview for the course itself, get you a little bit acquainted with MVA and GitHub, and then we'll launch on into it from there. So Susan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Susan Ibach, and I am a technical evangelist at Microsoft Canada. What that job title basically means is it's my job to help developers understand what our developer tools do, why you might use them, and how you use them, and how to get started with them. And I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer, and the first computer I ever owned was a TRS-80 color computer, which had a grand total of 64K of memory. So I have been programming a little longer than I care to admit, and looking forward to talking to everybody today. And when I'm not in front of the computer, enjoy eating my husband's amazing cooking, hanging out with my boys, and training for a marathon at the moment.
And Boston, yeah. She's being a little modest there. She qualified for Boston, her first marathon out. Anybody who's a runner knows that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
So as for me, I am Christopher Harrison. I'm a longtime MCT. I'm now a content developer here at Microsoft Learning. I focus in on web and O365 development. I miss my Commodore 64 dearly. Load star, 8, 1. I'm a longtime geek, obviously. I periodically blog at blog.geektrainer.com. You can also find us, by the way, on our Twitter handles, which you'll see periodically. And then in my spare time, I enjoy spending time with my wife, our 4-legged child, and I do marathon as well. I'm not as fast as Susan, however. Now, as far as the course itself goes, you're going to notice that we've broken this down into 6 modules. And I want to mention right away that this really is designed to be part 3. So if you haven't already done part 1, part 2, there's obviously still going to be a fair amount that you're going to be able to glean from this.
Oh, for sure, yeah. But still, like, you know, when you talk about how to connect to a database from Python, if you're coding in Python, that's going to make sense to you when we cover that module. And the Jinja templates as well.
Yeah.
It's a lot of still good. But if you did take the first 2 courses, you're going to find this a very natural progression, because we're actually going to start with sort of the code we finished with in the last one and use that that as their starting point and improve our application. So just in terms of a demos, you're going to really follow the demos. Are going to be much more clean if you've seen the previous courses.
Exactly, yeah. But don't, turn us off and go watch the other two courses.
No.
Stick around. We're going to have some fun today. So we're going to start off by talking about application design, because one of the things about Flask is that it gives you a very basic foundation, which is great. It gives you flexibility. But the question then becomes, well, where do we actually put our code? So we'll start off there. We'll then roll on into object-oriented programming, which is going to give us the ability to kind of breathe life, I like to say, into our code and give it some additional levels of functionality. We're then going to turn our attention into databases, how to utilize a relational database, talk about the different options that are there and how to set up that backend. And then the next module will be actually connecting to that, like Susan mentioned, and then migrating our code, which was using Redis from the prior course, into using Azure SQL. And then we're going to turn our attention to the front end. So the bulk of this will be kind of on the back end. We'll turn our attention to the front end, take a look at Jinja layouts, and then close everything out with Bootstrap.
And the Jinja layouts and Bootstrap is awesome because, we've talked a bit about the database side. What the Jinja and Bootstrap is going to do is allow you to polish up the front end. So
exactly.
You're going to learn about structuring your code, connecting to new options for back-end server code with a database, and then polish it all up with a beautiful look and feel with that Bootstrap and Jinja.
And that's exactly it. Now, as far as who you are, as you're sitting there at home or in your office, hopefully with a nice cup of coffee or whatever it is that you use to get yourself going in the morning, you hear that little bit of Jersey coming out of me, coffee. But in any event, as for the target audience there, we are expecting that you do have familiarity with Python, that hopefully you did attend the prior courses that we've done. But even if you haven't, and really even if you are experienced in another environment, like if you've done Java web apps, if you've done MVC, if you've done Cold Fusion, I guess, and you're just kind of looking to learn another environment, you're still going to be able to glean quite a bit from this. But we are expecting a little bit of Python experience, a bit of programming experience, definitely not a first course necessarily, but even if you don't necessarily meet all the prerequisites, I think there's still quite a bit
as long as you can follow the syntax of the programming language that we're writing, you're going to be able to follow it from that perspective.
Yeah.
And if you have experience in a different, especially if you have experience in a different web environment, you're going to find some familiarities that'll help you cross over to Python Flask if you're coming from another web tool.
Exactly. Now, as far as the community goes, if you haven't already joined up, you're going to notice that we have 2.6 million registered users, new users being added every day. You're going to notice that there is training basically on every Microsoft product, I think, that we ship. You know what we need? We need an MVA on Bob. You'll also notice that you can get 50 MVA points. If we see the slide here real quick, you're going to notice that the voucher code is right there, that SQL Python Flask, and you can fire that up. If you are curious, because I can bet that people are already asking in the Q&A window, where can we get that code? It is on the Q&A window as well. Now, just simply watching us, as entertaining as we like to think that we are, is not necessarily the best way to consume this course. You've got to get in and you've got to get your hands dirty. So all of the code that we're going to be using today is available at github.com, whack Microsoft Learning, whack Python SQL Flask. Now, if you haven't already done anything inside of GitHub, I actually recently wrote up a blog post kind of giving a little bit of a step-by-step walkthrough on that, and you can see both of those in those slides right there. Susan, I'm going to put you in charge of copying and pasting that into the Q&A. I'm going to give you a little bit of work to do here. Now, one little thing that I do want to mention is the virtual environments for Python are not uploaded into GitHub automatically. And so what you're going to notice is that you'll wind up with an empty virtual environment. And so when you try to launch the application, it will give you a file not found error, which is sort of a bit confusing. What it's really complaining about is, hey, I don't even have Flask installed. And so that's why it's saying file not found, because it can't even find that. The way around this is there's a little file called the requirements text that will contain all of the different packages that are going to be needed, and you can just create the environment just by right-clicking and saying install from requirements text. Or you could also just create a new environment that way. And I think the best way to do this is really just to get in and do a 30-second demo here just on how to get around and do everything. So what I want to do, there we go. So here's the blog post, real quick, that I threw together, and I swear this is not just a shameless plug, although it's kind of working out that way. But this will list off kind of everything that you need to know to get started inside of GitHub. So that way, if you just want to go grab a copy of our code very easily, this will walk you through how to do it. If I bring up my GitHub here, and let me actually just go to Microsoft Learning, there we go. And there's that Python SQL Flask. I do want to highlight over here on the lower right-hand corner, there's that clone in desktop. So if you just want to download that real quick, that's the easiest way to do that. And Susan, you've put that URL into the Q&A window.
Yep. Okay. There's a link in the Q&A window there.
Perfect, so people can go grab that. And then the last little thing to again mention is inside of Visual Studio, you're going to notice that you're going to have either an empty environment or no environment when you go download them. So what you can actually do is just simply right-click on your virtual environments, and then when you choose Add Virtual Environment, it will automatically read from that requirements text file, which is sort of hidden behind that dialog box. Or you can also just right-click on the particular environment and say install from requirements text. And I'm going a little bit quick through that, and that's because we actually spent a lot more time on that on the first Python MVA. But I just wanted to do that real quickly as a refresher because it can catch you, especially because that error message isn't overly clear. File not found, and you're thinking, well, wait a minute, did it just not download something?
Yeah.
And as it turned out, it's just because it's missing its environment. Okay. In any event, let's get into it.
Let's get into the content here.
Yeah.
So now, okay, deep breath. Okay,
Yes.
So that's sort of set up and getting you up and rolling.
All right.
There is one quick comment
yeah.
in the Q&A just saying they're having trouble with the downloading the slides, so we'll check that when we get to the break.
Yeah.
Just remember, we are the ones maintaining that GitHub, and we're doing all this live at the same time. So when we get to the break, we'll double check and make sure both slides are in there for the GitHub and that you have access to those.
Yeah, and along those same lines, we try to answer every single question that comes through. But again, you guys have us outnumbered. There's two of us. There's a bunch of you, so you have us a bit outnumbered here. But we're doing our absolute best here. Okay, so you're going to notice here I've got a very in-depth slide. There we go. So Flask is, I think, kind of a unique platform because a lot of other web environments that I've worked in provide a lot of structure, and Flask really doesn't. That it provides you a way to create web applications, but it doesn't force you into a structure. That when you stop and think, for example, about MVC, Model View Controller, it's right there in the name, and that really is the design. And so while it's not necessarily hard forcing you into that, it's certainly driving you in that direction. Or if you take a look at web forms, all of that's going to be event-based, and that's really kind of the way that you have to design your application. Flask, however, just says, hey, here's a little environment to start building on, and I love the way that that the creator actually talks about it. He says that it's built on Python, Flask, something else that I can't remember, and good intentions. And that's really it. It's a very plain environment for you to build from, which is great. It gives you a lot of flexibility to choose how you want to best design for your application. But the problem becomes that as your application starts to grow, things can get messy.
Yeah, so it's a great way, that's one of the reasons we chose it as a great way to get you started into web development, because it's you can start off with something very simple, and when you've got simple websites, not organizing your code in a particular structure is fine, and it's, you can just start getting a hang of the different files you work with for building websites. But as your applications grow and as you start to build more complex websites, then that structure becomes more important.
Exactly, yeah. So imagine, if you will, that we had a very simple little application that's represented by my my very complex little green box here. I do a lot of really high-end graphics. And so one of the big problems that you wind up running into is code duplication.
Oh, that is so common. You know, you build 2 web pages and they have some similar code. So you start copying the code from one place to another. So you end up doing that all the time.
Exactly.
The same error handling code in 2 places.
Exactly, yeah. The same error handling code, the same database connection code. You know, you're doing that over and over and over and over again. And then you're going to wind up sometimes with spaghetti code, which is confusing code that it leads from one spot to the next, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. And then you've got code duplication. Again, that same code over and over and over again. And then you can wind up with debugging issues that as things get more complex, trying to figure out what went wrong can be that much harder. And of course, built on top of that, you've got more code duplication.
Because let's be clear, programmers love copy and paste.
When I take over the world, which I'm eventually going to do, the first thing that I'm going to do is remove copy paste from every single IDE, integrated development environment, just because of that exact
How
problem.
will we code without copy and paste? I don't know how to code without copy and paste.
We're going to get you away from it,
Okay.
Susan. You're also going to notice that you can wind up with performance issues because as your code starts to grow, as your application starts to become more complex, you're going to wind up with performance issues, which is represented by my really cool lightning bolt there. And then last but not least, of course, is code duplication. In case you haven't noticed
I'm noticing that you think that occasionally some of us, when we're coding, have issues with code duplication.
Exactly. Yeah, so now what we want to do is we want to get in and take a look at how we're going to design things in Flask. So we'll talk a little bit about some design concepts, and then we'll spin that specifically into Python and take a look at how packages work inside of Python. So let's start off by taking a look at some basic design concepts. And these are really going to be true, I think, universally. This is actually one of my favorite little quotes, and you can see the reference down at the very bottom. But I find it immensely to work on the assumption that I am too stupid to get things right. This leads me to conservatively use what has already been shown to work, to cautiously test out new ideas before committing to them, and above all, prize simplicity.
That is a fantastic statement.
It really
is.
Yeah, it's kind of harsh, I think, that I'm too stupid to get things right. But, when you stop to think about the complexity of code, that
you got a lot of things to worry about.
Absolutely, yeah, that even something that starts out very simple can get very complex very quickly. That one of the things as we were going through and designing this application and trying to make sure that our demos walk that fine line of being real world enough to give you enough to sink your teeth into, but not so much that it was going to overwhelm you, it became a bit tricky so that, trying to do things like even just creating a drop-down list can be a little bit tricky. And I don't want to say that it's overly complicated because it's not, but it just adds yet another complexity to your page. And when you start to add one little complexity to another, it can spin out of control very quickly. And so even simple applications can get away from you in very short order. So if you just simply go in with the assumption of, oh, look, I don't know everything. Check your ego at the door. Just admit right up front, you know what? I don't have all the answers, so let me go see what other people have done. There's a good friend of mine that likes to say we're not launching rockets here. And the point that he's saying is whatever it is that we're doing, somebody else has already done. They've typically been kind enough to write some form of a package, something which we'll actually continue to dig into today, or a blog post on how to do something, and started to define some of the best practices because they've already gone out, they've already made the mistakes that you're going to make, and they've come up with a better answer. So build on that. Use what's already out there. So with that in mind, first of all, keep it simple. That the easiest way to avoid complexity is keep it as easy as possible. Number 2, use what's there. And really a couple of things here. Don't be afraid of using an existing framework. Don't let pride get in the way of using somebody else's code. But I would also go one step further to something I don't have on this slide, which is to say use other examples as a framework for what you're going to build. That if you head back out and download or to the PTVS site, which is at ptvs.codeplex.com, another URL for you to put in. That's where you can go get the Python development tools for Visual Studio, ptvs.codeplex.com.
Yes. Yep.
On there, you'll actually see that there's a whole set of samples that are available for you as well. Use those samples as, well, sample structure for how to put together your app. And then finally, last but not least, is make changes as needed and design with that in mind. Because there's an old saying that the only constant in software development is change. So with those couple of things in mind, let's focus in on some core concepts here. So number one, write once, use everywhere. Copy paste is bad. And this is true even if it's just 2 lines of code, that I've actually simplified so many applications that I've created just by creating a helper method. And it might be 2 little lines of code, but by my balling that up and creating a function out of that or creating a method out of that, I've now simplified my code because now it's just 1 little line. And especially when it comes to something like connecting to a database. Because if my database connection string changes, I don't want to run around my entire application updating that. I want to go to one spot, update it one time, and be done with it. So even though connecting to a database might only be a couple lines of code, putting that off into a function and calling that is still going to make my code that much easier to read and that much more maintainable and that much more resilient to change.
Yeah. No. One of the personal rules I actually honestly do have when coding, I joke about the copy and paste. It
is an old joke, yeah.
But the fact is, I actually am in the habit of when I'm writing code and I start writing code, and as soon as I find myself copying, pasting code within my own code, from one place to another, I stop myself and go, wait a second. It's not because copy and paste is difficult to do, but one of the things you do learn the more you code is that key point you pointed out was things will change.
Yep.
You're going to need to change an error message, or you're going to need to change the server that you're connecting to, or you're going to want to change a parameter that changes a severity of something that you're passing into that method. So somewhere down the road, you're going to have to go change that line of code. And what will happen is when you copy and paste it to 2 or 3 different places, when you go back to change it, will you remember to change it in all 3 places? Because that's when you start breaking your own code. You remember to fix it in one place, and then you forget you copied that code somewhere else, so you don't change it there, and now,
yeah.
That's how we break our own code. So the moment I do a copy and paste, I stop myself and go, and I literally do it the first time. As soon as I copy and paste code and I realize I have the exact same code in 2 places, I go, exactly what you described, Christopher. Time to pull that out, put it into a function, and let's just call that function from 2 places so that if down the road something changes, I only need to change it in one place. That's my goal. But if a rule or I need to change something in my code, I only want to have to change it in one place. And that's why code duplication is very dangerous as your applications grow, because you'll forget where to make all the necessary changes. You only want to change one thing.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, Martin Fowler, Kent Beck, and somebody else wrote this book called Refactoring, Improving the Design of Existing Code. And it was based on Java, and it's really sort of a universal book, even though the book itself used Java as the language. And it really is all about, you know, how do I take my existing code and make it better? How do I make it read better? And one of the things that they introduce is this word smell. And I love that word. Because the thing about a smell is just because it smells bad, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is bad. It's just an indication that something might be going astray. And there are code smells, but then there are also behavior smells as well. That, just as Susan pointed out, that if you're copying and pasting, let that be a trigger for you. That, is it necessarily bad? Maybe not, but the vast majority of the time it is. So when you find yourself copying and pasting, take a look at what you've just done and see if maybe you can create a function instead. Now, the next thing about designing out your application is design in layers. Make it an onion, if you will. Onions have layers, applications have layers. And so that each layer has a specific job. So you're going to create a layer for data access, and that's responsible for going back and forth between the back-end database and the front-end application. You're going to have a layer for your business logic. That's going to be responsible for enforcing rules. So for example, if you need to create an HR app and somebody's going to request vacation and you need to make sure that they're not requesting more vacation than they have available days, you're going to want that inside the business layer. And the couple of things when you're designing those layers, number one is that they then become reusable. So that way I could reuse that business logic and that data logic with another front end. So maybe later on I don't want to do a Python app, that maybe I want to expose this out and start doing some web services based off of this. So I could expose it out that way. And the other big thing is you want to make them, to a certain extent, ignorant of the other layer. That one of the big things that you're going to see when we go in and start redesigning our application is that we're going to take our app with our Redis client, we're going to redesign it to keep using Redis, and then we're going to have this really, really cool demo later on this afternoon where we're going to update one little line of code and change it so that it will now be using SQL instead. And if we decided we wanted to kick it back and use Redis, again, it would be updating one little line of code to do that. And so the great advantage there is you can then start switching all of that on just one little line of code by just making sure that you're making the different layers ignorant of what's going on in the other environment. That when I go to save a question, because we're doing our trivia app, I don't care where it's saved. I just want to call something and say, here, save it. And if it's putting it out to disk, if it's putting it into a database, if it's putting it into memory, I don't care. As long as it saves it and it gives me the ability to retrieve it later, that's the important part.
And some people may be thinking, wow, but you wouldn't really change what data source you're using on the fly in an application. Mm-hmm. But you know what? I have absolutely been on projects where we started off using one database product and then we got partway through it, and because of either licensing issues at the company where we were working or because of all sorts of different factors and things, somebody decides they want to go open source instead of a purchase product, or they want to go to or even they're just moving the database to a different server, like in the testing environment, development environment, you're on one server, and then when you go to production, you're on a completely different server.
Yep.
So that ability to make as few changes as possible, yet point to entirely different data source, it really does happen. That's a very real world scenario.
Absolutely. And then last but not least is use patterns. Well, what's a pattern? I'm glad you asked. So a pattern is a recipe to solve a problem. And I think that's the best description here, is that it's designed to be a recipe. So the thing about recipes is that recipes don't need to be followed exactly. I've mentioned this on a couple of other MVAs. Susan was actually just over at my house on Sunday, and I did up my famous chicken cacciatore. And so I've got the recipe that I use for that, but I always go in and embellish it. So I add more garlic. I'll typically add more liquid as needed, because the recipe is designed to be a guide, and then you go in and you adjust based on your situation. So just like recipes don't need to be followed exactly, patterns don't need to be followed exactly. So you can make those substitutions as needed in your recipe and on your pattern. Use what fits and modify where it doesn't. Now, one of the biggest patterns that we want to introduce is this concept of Model View Controller, or MVC. And I should highlight right away for anybody who's probably seen any of my other MVAs, because a lot of my other MVAs have been around ASP.NET MVC. I should stress here that MVC is a pattern first and foremost. That yes, we called the MVC implementation for ASP.NET MVC, kind of just keeping it relatively straightforward there, just like SQL Server. But just like SQL is not proprietary to Microsoft, MVC is not proprietary to Microsoft. That was a very easy word for me to say there. So MVC is a pattern, and it consists of three basic parts. The model, which is your data, the view, which is what the user is going to see, and then a controller. And the controller is going to be the puppet master, so to speak. So that the request is going to come into the controller. The controller is going to figure out, oh, okay, well, this is the data that the user's looking for. It's going to go get the data. That data, by the way, would be known as the model. And then it's going to combine the model with the view and send it out the door. So it looks a little bit like this. So the request comes in. It's going to hit the controller. And the controller is going to go retrieve the model, and it's going to, and I love this phrase, and I have to give a tip of the hat to John Galloway here. This is his phrase.
Yep.
It does stuff. Okay, good. That narrows it down. Well, the reason that we kept it very generic there, does stuff, is because that stuff could be literally anything. So it could be going off to a backend database and pulling data from there. It could be going off to a cloud service and pulling data from there. It could be going off to a file and pulling data from there. And I really don't care where that data is as long as we go get the data. And that data is the model. And so you're going to notice that we've got the model, and it's inside of a nice little suitcase there. It's, there you go.
Very nice.
Yep, little suitcase. Looks like a caboodle. I'm showing my age there by saying
I don't
caboodle.
think I even know what a caboodle is. So I've heard of the kitten caboodle, but
yeah, it's a caboodle. My wife still has one.
Okay.
Anybody who's you have to be in a particular age range to know a caboodle. In any event, so it's going to load up that model and then combine that with the view. And the goal of the view here is to represent that model for the user. So it's basically just designed to breathe life into it. So if we were displaying out a customer, for example, we'd probably have the name of the customer in relatively large-ish text, and then maybe the address of the customer in kind of smaller text down below that. That's the view's job, is putting that together. So that way we've got, whatever the user's name is up here, and then down below we've got the user's address in smaller text. That's the responsibility of the view, and then eventually that's going to get sent out the door. Then you can notice that little address card sort of right there. Now, the thing about model view controller is that this can really be applied in a lot of different areas, and it's a nice separation of concerns. That my controller is responsible for taking the request, getting the data, sending it out. That my model is responsible for being the data, and my view is responsible for sending that response back out, or my view is responsible rather for being the view, being the UI that my user's now going to see.
So the view is, more of a screens that I'm seeing on this, that the user actually sees. That's the view.
Exactly. Yeah. So, let's try and kind of keep on with this. And how about an analogy? All right. Well, you're at a restaurant. Your server's the controller. That your server is responsible for taking your order, going back to the kitchen, and delivering it. The food is the model, because that's what you're trying to get. And then the plate and the other accoutrements that go on there, that's the view, because after all, it's all about the presentation. That when you're serving that chicken cacciatore, you want a nice bit of Parmesan cheese, bit of parsley on top. It's all about that presentation there. Now, is that a bit of a labored analogy?
Well,
yeah, but
yeah. We may need to find a way to tie this back into Flask.
So
that's a lot of theory.
Yeah,
it's
a lot of theory. So let's go in and take a look at a real quick demo. And what I actually want to do here, and this will actually serve two purposes, I think, is I want to take a look at sort of the final result that we're going to wind up with. So that way you can see where it is that we're going. That whenever I take a class, I think that's very helpful. Show me what the picture is. That this isn't a movie. It's not like The Sixth Sense where the guy was dead the whole time.
You're going to give us a spoiler?
Yeah, I just did. Yeah, I'm going to give you a spoiler. Okay. So don't worry, I'm not going to give you a Breaking Bad spoiler, but I am going to give you a spoiler for where we're going today. So let's go in and take a look at our end application. And I'm not going to launch it just because we haven't actually created the database yet, because again, we're going to do that live. And honestly, we don't need to launch it per se, but what we do want to do is at least just kind of peruse the different moving parts. Okay, so first of all, what I want you to notice is we've got this little item right here called runserver.py. And what runserver.py is going to do for us is that's going to be responsible for loading everything up, just getting everything going. You're also going to notice that we've got this little py file here called views.py. Now, views.py, unfortunately, is actually the controller. And this is always one of those things where you sort of have to roll with the punches. That when I'm programming in VB script or VB6, I still use Hungarian notation. And for those of you not familiar with Hungarian notation, that's the couple little abbreviations for the data type in front of the variable. So age, for example, for int age. Now, personally, I don't like Hungarian notation, and I don't want to get too far down that road, but I don't like Hungarian notation, but I do it. Why? Well, because that's what VB6 and that's what VB script developers are used to seeing. That's basically, when in Rome, so to speak, that's what they do, and that's what I'm going to do as well. So convention in Python Flask is to call this views.py. It really is the controller in a traditional MVC sense, because what you're going to notice here, if I go full screen on my code, is we've got all of the routes that we had last time. So there's my hello and there's my create, and this really is the controller.
Right, because the controller is the one that's going off and saying, I've received a request, and my request is, then I go into those routes, and based on the request I receive, I then say, well, now I will go do X.
Absolutely.
And that's what a controller does.
That's exactly what a controller does. And so while, yes, this is called views.py, it really is the controller. I still call it views.py because, again, that does
just
seem
a convention.
to be convention.
It's
yeah,
the convention.
So when in Rome,
Yep, little confusing, but yes, the file views.py is your controller.
Is going to be our controller. The next thing that you're going to notice inside of here, and again, I'm sort of giving things away a little bit, is that we do have our SQL client, and that's going to be responsible for loading and saving the question. And so you'll notice that if I come down here, you're going to notice right here that I've got client equals client and then client save question. And that's going to be responsible for going off to the database and saving that question. And if I scroll on down here into my next little question, you're going to notice that I've got get answer here. I've got get question up here. And again, that's going to be responsible for going out to the database and loading that model back. So again, we've got that in action. And again, kind of trying to draw that fine line. If we really wanted to go another step with this, I absolutely could have made question an object with an answer and a text, I guess, property on it. But in this case, we decided to keep it pretty simple and just kind of keep working with strings instead.
Yeah, that's it. And we're going to cover objects next module. We're going to create that code that's there for reading and writing to the database later in the course. I said this is just focusing here on where's the model, where's the view, where's the controller in this application. Don't panic too much if some of that code you're looking at going, what's it doing?
Exactly. Yep. Now, you're also going to notice here that we've got our models folder. And so, of course, that's where our models are going to go. And you're going to notice that I've got two in here, our Redis client and our SQL client. And that's going to be responsible for going off to Redis and SQL, respectively. And then last but not least is our template, and that's going to be our views. Now, I am going to just highlight our Redis client in a moment here, but I just want to zoom in. There we go. I think I can actually do this all on one screen. I can. Good. So up here, that was sort of weird. Why is my zoom at? That's sort of weird. In any event, so up here's our models. So that's going to be the data. That's going to be kind of doing its thing behind the scenes. This right here, that's our views. There we go.
That makes sense because the views are the websites, HTML pages are defining our text boxes and headers and all that good stuff. So it makes sense that our views are the HTML files.
Yep. And then last but not least that's our controller. I know. It's named views.py. But it is, in fact, our controller because, again, that's what's going to be responsible for taking the user request. So that's going to take the user request. That's then going to make the call to our appropriate client that's going to go off, get the data from the database. It's going to be combined with whatever view it is that we need for right now, and then that will then get sent out the door. And that's sort of the lifespan that we have there, and that's the three different moving parts, and that's what we're going to be building towards. Okay. So what we're going to be building towards is setting up our model here that's going to go to the database. We're going to have all of our templates here. That's going to be our views, and then finally at the very last end is going to be our controller. And let me get rid of the ink there.
Okay, so we got a request is going to come in. The request is going to go to that controller, which is views.py. Views.py is going to take that request, and it's going to figure out which model to go talk to, which is that Redis client or the SQL client file you had up there.
My Zoom just does not like me today. Okay, so here we go. I'm just sort of getting back. Yep.
Request comes in to views.py, which is our controller. It looks at that request and then figures out what code it needs to call, and that's that Redis client or SQL client, depending on the request that came in. And then that model does some magic behind the scenes, executes some code, and says, I got some results, so let's give you a nice view back in the nice HTML page and display that to the user.
Exactly. Yep. So we're going to combine that data with a particular view and then send that back out to my little user.
Awesome. There
over
we
here.
go.
There we go.
Awesome.
By the way, that's my little magic wand.
No, it's a magic wand.
Yeah.
Okay, I figured that. and obviously, I'm not the user because it doesn't have big, messy, curly hair. So.
I could go in and draw that. In any event, the last little thing that I want to highlight real quickly here on what we're going to be building towards is our couple of objects, and you're going to notice that we do have our client, and in this particular case, it's going to be for Redis, and then you're going to notice that we've got all the code inside of there. And again, the whole goal of that is not to really dig into everything that there is to know about MVC, or obviously to teach the app. That's what we have the rest of the day for. It really was, let's just go in and kind of take a look at where we're going, which I think kind of helps set the stage for the rest. So with that in mind, let's actually get in and start doing a little bit of code. And the first bit of code that we want to talk about is what Python knows or calls a package. And so what's a package? Well, put simply, it's a packaged block of code. See, it's not just a clever name. And
so I can't just put my block of code in a caboodle?
Not a caboodle. No.
Caboodle. Okay.
No. In fact, it's going to go into a folder
Okay.
instead. And that really is it. That when you hear the word package sounds wonderful. But at the end of the day, it's really nothing more than a folder with a collection of Py files inside of it. So there's not a whole lot that's special about it. Because when you stop and think about, your application, we talked about the complexity and how things can get away from you. So, in theory, we could keep adding code to the exact same file. But in reality, we can't. And we could keep putting all of those new files, if we decide to break it apart, into a single folder. But in reality, we can't. Because the problem is that that's just not going to scale. And so if we take a look here, you're going to notice that I've got a little bit of an example of kind of what a package setup might look for. And you're going to notice that we've got a very nice, clean separation of concerns here. That down at the bottom, we've got our little quiz. And let's say that that's now going to become our quiz application. So maybe we create a folder, we call it data, and we give it data access, and that's going to be responsible for going off and working with the backend database. And then we've got a couple models down here that are going to be responsible for being the question and for being the category and whatever else it is. And so that's going to be our quiz. But let's say that later on we decide we want to add on an administration component as well. So we want to control who's allowed to ask questions. So what we could do then is create a brand new package. We'll call it, creatively enough, admin. And then admin is going to need potentially its own data access, or maybe, we're going to share that. In my little sample, I just put it off. And then, we've got something to be our user and something to be our permission. And so you'll notice that we've got a nice, clean separation there. And that way, whoever's responsible, the person who's responsible for building the admin side, can just focus in on that side. And then the person that's going to be responsible for working on the quiz side.
Oh, so I'm building the quiz. Okay, got it.
Yep,
all right.
You're gonna build the
Based
quiz
on that
side.
there, I'm guessing that's me.
Yep. Then can be responsible for the quiz side. So it creates a very nice, clean separation. The other very big thing that this does for us is it helps avoid name clashes. Because let's think about this for a couple of minutes, that we may have an admin component, and on the admin component we're going to have our user. But we may also later on decide that for our quiz that we want high scores, and maybe that's a different user. It's a different type of user, but it's still a user. So we may want to be able to call it a user and call it a user. We want to be able to reuse that name. But if we try to put that inside the same file or inside the same folder, obviously that's not going to work. So by putting them into two separate packages, it gives us that ability to reuse that name as we need to.
Just the same way we can have two files with the same name on our computers.
In different folders.
In different folders.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly it. And that's sort of why I like to just focus in on, just to try and clear away any potential magic that people might think go on behind the scenes with packages, is that at the end of the day, all that a package is, all that it is it's just simply a folder. That's it. And that can contain Py files, it can contain other folders, as we're going to see going forward. The only catch
and this is a Python thing.
This is a Python thing. It needs to have a file called __init underscore underscore pi. Yes, that's 2 underscore. It's a keyword. Just go with it. Just kind of roll with it.
That is the syntax. It is what it is. But yeah, the key thing there is, that's 2 underscores, not 1.
Exactly.
You can't really see that in the PowerPoint slide that it's 2 underscores. That's why there's an actual bullet point reminding you of that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's 2 underscores. And so it's what's cool about it is that it's the first file that's going to be called. So that can set up your environment, and it can import other files and do whatever else it is that's going to be needed there. All right, so how do we then go get an item from a package?
Yeah, if we've gone and moved these into these packages, there has to be a way that I can still reference them and be specific about which one that I want, because we were saying you could have one with the same name in 2 different locations.
Exactly. Yep. So you're going to notice that I brought back to life our little example here. So how do I go grab some method that's inside of server pi? Well, what you're going to notice is that it's going to be admin, data, server, and then whatever the name of the method happens to be. And you're going to notice admin, data, server. Okay. And so inside of question.py, how do we go get that? Well, quiz, models, question, method. And what you're going to notice, sure enough, is quiz, data, and then data access. Or I'm sorry, oops, I went the wrong direction there. Forgive me. Models, question. There we go.
And that's nice and intuitive.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's just like trying to find a file in a folder. You specify the file path, and it takes you to that specific file. And in this case, we're just specifying, sort of a package path.
Yeah. Instead of using slashes, we're just using dots.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So let's take our app then, and let's do it. So let's go back into Visual Studio here. And I want Visual Studio. Beautiful. Okay. So real quick here, I don't have Module 6. There is actually going to be a Module 6 today, but I don't have it pre-baked. And that's actually by design, because I really want to go in and show off Bootstrap at the end. It's so cool. But in any event, so what you're going to notice is that we've got pre-baked here Module 0, which is the starting point, 1, 2, 4, and 5. There is no Visual Studio code for 3, so that's why that's gone. And those modules are there for sort of 2 purposes. Number 1, so that way if something goes wrong, we've got code that works.
Yep.
But number 2 is so that way for our, it'll come to me in a second here. Yeah, so we've got that broken down, but also B, so that way if you want to go in and take a look at everything, then you have all of that. Now, what I'm going to do with the demos here is I'm actually going to start with MBA Trivia, which is exactly where we left off our heroes, so to speak, from last time. And I'm just going to update this into the environment that we want. I'm just real quick behind the scenes here, grabbing the updated Redis. Oh, you know what I'm going to do, actually, is let me just copy and paste that, because I forgot our routes when I created that real quick this morning.
Routes would be helpful.
Routes would be helpful. Okay.
Would you, is it in a state where you'd be able to run it right now, just for people who may not have seen the app before, so they can see the finished application? A minute to do that might be helpful.
You're putting me on the spot here. I think this works.
Yeah, I was going to say, I realize you haven't tried it this morning, so.
Okay, so in any event, here is create a question, and so I'm going to give this a name of hockey. I'm going to give this question, how many minutes in a period, and you, of course, of all people, should know that it's 20. And I'm going to click submit. And so it created that. And then I'm going to update our URL to say question hockey. Hit enter. Now it's going to.
Now you need to. It was hockey trivia, wasn't it? Or I don't remember what you called it.
Called it hockey.
Okay. Okay. So somehow you seem to have reversed the. Some of the logic. So basically what the app does, for those of you who haven't seen it before, haven't done the previous course, is it's just a little trivia app where you can enter a hockey trivia question, or any trivia question. You give your trivia question a name, and you provide the question, and you provide an answer for it. And then somebody can try to answer your trivia question. And the way we bring back a particular trivia question is just, it's in the URL string. So when we're typing in a URL up top, we have to specify the question name, and that's when that particular question comes up and we attempt to answer it. And this is the wonderful world of live debugging. But Christopher, for the sake of explaining MVC and packages, we know
in any
we won't worry.
Okay.
That's just so you know the type of application we're building.
So, so for right now, don't worry too much about the Redis code. There's a problem with the Redis in here, and I swear to you, we tested this last night. I swear to you, we tested this last night.
Yes, we are live,
and it worked. So there's just some little mistake somewhere in here, and I'll go back in and figure out what it is in a moment.
But for now, packages.
Yeah, so here's what I want to do is I want to get in and rework this to create a package. So let's go in and let's just create our little trivia MVA app package. Now you can actually create a package in one of two ways. Now one way that you can do this is just by adding in a brand new folder.
Okay.
Because as we mentioned before, my Python packages are just simply folders. So we could just go in and add in the new folder, add in the underscore initpy, and everything will actually work. And that's exactly the way that I'm going to do it here, just because I want to show that there is no, I don't know who Trisha is, but I do want to just simply show that there's no magic here. So I'm just going to right-click Trivia MVA app, and I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to say Add New Item, and this is going to be my empty Python file. And let's go ahead and call this underscore init underscore py, and I'm going to click add. Now, you're going to notice that when I go in and I create the folder, that Visual Studio, when it's a package, will put a little like gift package. See, you get it? It's a package next to the folder. The people who do the icons are very clever that way. But you're going to notice that for the one that I just created, it's not there. Don't let that panic you, because all that's happened here is Visual Studio just hasn't picked up yet that I've created this as a package. Now, it sort of has, because you'll notice that there's this little thing right here called MVA, Trivia MVA app. It just hasn't updated the UI. So again, don't let that icon throw you.
Yeah, don't think you've done something wrong
Exactly.
or haven't created your init.py file correctly just because you don't see that icon.
Exactly.
It will get there. Probably when you've left the application and like relaunch Visual Studio,
Yeah.
it'll pick up and show the icon.
Yeah, and I think if you there's also like a refresh over here that you can do
Yeah.
as well, which might do it. Let me see. Right click and do I have a refresh?
Not off there.
So, okay,
Yep.
in any event,
So-
doesn't really matter. All right, so there's my little init. And so again, the whole goal of our init is to set everything up. It's designed to get everything up and running. So if we go in and we take a look at our previous app py file, what we did was we set up our Flask app, and then we loaded up our routes. I'm going to cut and paste that into our initpy file. So I took the exact same code that we had, the exact same code, and I just simply cut and pasted that into there. So again, we haven't done anything magical. We're just simply now moving everything into a package.
All the initialization, the setup code.
Exactly. So now that's inside of a initpy. Now what I want to do is that routes file, I want to put that into the app as well. And I'm going to rename this. Let's call this views, just like we should.
Yep.
And so there's that. Now, we are going to have to make one little update to our views, because our views is going to be looking globally for app, because that's where it was. It was just available globally. Now we put it into a package, because you'll notice inside of initpy, this is now where we've created that app. That's only now available inside of, bad line. That's only available inside of that app. So we have to load it from that app. So instead of saying from app import app, it's now going to be
We have to specify that full path with the package name?
Trivia MVA app import app. There you go. And you'll notice that it turns to purple because it's picking up the fact that we have the app inside of there. So that's that one little line of code that we're now going to need to update to make that happen.
Yeah, because we moved its location.
Now, we moved the location of the app, but you know we also just moved the location of it and the name of?
Our controller?
Exactly, yeah, that it was originally called routes, available globally, now it's inside that package. So the other big thing is you'll notice that last time we just simply said from routes import everything. Well, now it's inside of that Trivia MVA app. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say import, if I can type correctly, Trivia MVA app dot, and then you'll notice that there's our views.
Right, because now the file, we renamed the file to views.py, so we have to say views.
Exactly. And then the last little thing is inside of our app py, we still need the app in order to launch the server. So I'm now just going to say from Trivia MVA app, import app. and then we can go ahead and launch our server. I am going to give this a better name. So just F2 and run server. And so now, if I put everything in the right place, what we should see when I launch this is create question. Now we know that right now it's not being saved back to Redis. We'll figure that out in a minute. But this should at least launch. And so if I launch this, Control F5, hit yes. So it now says create question, and at least this bit of UI is still working.
Ha! Famous last words.
In any event, so what should have happened...
Did you actually move your app.py into the package?
No.
Okay, because I thought you'd change the file to point to that location. Okay.
So in any event, so what should have happened, and I swear to you, we were here last night. We ran through all of this last night. I know this is an inauspicious start to the day. What do you say we go ahead and take 10 minutes? Hopefully what you've picked up there is packages and how to put things into there. I'm going to fix whatever this bit of code is, and then we'll come on back and we'll take a look at how to create objects. In the meantime, let's go ahead and take 10.
All right.
You know, sometimes all you can just do is laugh. In any event, welcome back. That's Susan Ibach. I'm Christopher Harrison, and this is SQL, Python, and Flask. And for those of you who missed it earlier, we had a small demo failure. And we're actually still having a slight issue here. And for whatever this is worth, and it's probably not a whole heck of a lot, but we did actually sit down last night and kind of walk through everything because we wanted to make sure that it worked. And I can sort of prove that it works because in a minute here, I'm actually going to pull up a question that I created last night with the exact same code. It will load that, but for whatever reason, this thing just refuses to save a question back, and I don't know exactly what's causing that. But that's all right. Well,
you forgot to do your tribute to the demo gods.
Yeah, no kidding.
Okay, so at lunchtime we will make our tribute to the demo gods, and everything will go well.
So anyway, yeah, we're really cooking here on this show. Here was the one little mistake that I did make, and that's the thing is that I will always open up to my mistakes. So where we left everything is we were trying to move everything into the package. And so if you remember, of course, Susan, there's three parts. There's the model, there's the controller, there's the view. Now we haven't built up a full model yet, but at the very least, we moved our controller. Remember, that's our controller.
Yeah.
We moved our controller into the package. You know what we didn't move? The views.
True.
There's our views.
Okay.
Inside of templates. So what I need to do is just simply drag and drop. That's it.
The views are inside the package.
So the views are inside the package. And so now what you're going to notice is that when I, again, Control F5, chugga, and when this thing comes back up, you're going to notice that it will now give me the ability to create a question.
So now the page is coming up correctly. So.
Exactly.
Okay, so.
Yep. And so let's go ahead and just give this a title of football.
Okay.
Yes, this is going to be American football. How many minutes in a quarter? And the answer is 20. And I'm going to, 15. There
I was beginning to wonder.
And then let's go ahead and save. And so, yeah, it tells me, thank you. And then I should be able to load that back up by saying question whack football.
Somebody pointed out case sensitivity. I was going to say, so huge code. Okay, major point to the person in the Q&A window who said, when you typed in demo the first time, you put an uppercase D, and then when you did it in the URL, it was a lowercase d. So congratulations, you win the award today. That is to Ariel Machado. You're the winner today of the Awesomeness Award for catching the mistake.
That's all in this episode. I hope this tutorial was helpful. In the next episode, we will continue with the remaining part of this course, which is creating website with Python, Flask, and SQL. Is your mind ringing with questions, queries, or doubts? Do you wish to learn more? Then visit our website www.millionlights.org and post your questions on our forum. We will be really happy to clear all your doubts. If you missed anything and want to rewatch it, you can download it from our website or can watch online as well. You can also participate in our webinars, discussions with the subject experts, as well as get Microsoft certification on various courses through our website. You can also find us on Facebook by the name Millionlights and also on Twitter. For more such interesting tutorials on coding, app development, programming, and building rich UIs, keep watching Microsoft Art of Code, brought to you by Millionlights. Thank you.